بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. In last week's lesson, we touched on the issue of polygamy in Islam. And I mentioned why a man is allowed to have 4 wives and why it is impermissible and unlawful for a woman to have 4 husbands. And I also touched on the issue of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam having more than 1 wife and the wisdom and the hikmah behind that. And I also touched on and looked at why did Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam marry Hazrat Aisha radhiyallahu anha at the age of 6, and then going on to consummate the marriage at the age of 9, and the wisdom and the hikmah behind that as well. Now in this week's lesson, or in today's lesson, we're just going to elaborate on the issue of polygamy. In particular, what should a husband, or how should a husband behave in terms of his conduct, in terms of his akhlaq and manners, if a person or if a husband has 2 wives. And thereafter, if we have time, we'll touch on some other aspects or some other rulings with regards to nikah and marriage. Now, it's mentioned in a hadith which can be found in Sunan al-Tirmidhi, in Sunan Abu Dawood and Sunan al-Nasai, narrated by Sayyiduna Abu Hurairah radhiyallahu anhu, that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has said, إِذَا كَانَتْ عِنْدَ الرَّجُلِ إِمْرَأَتَانِ فَلَمْ يَعْدِلْ بَيْنَهُمَا جاء يوم القيامة وشقه ساقط. And the meaning of this hadith is that if a husband or a man has 2 wives and he doesn't do insaf between them 2, so he's got 2 wives and he doesn't do any justice or insaf or adl between the 2, then it's mentioned that he will meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the hereafter, وشقه ساقط, and one of his sides would be paralyzed. Now, what we can gather from this particular hadith is that it is imperative, it is wajib, it is obligatory, it is necessary that if a husband has 2 wives, that he does insaf between the 2. And this word insaf or adl, what do we mean by doing insaf or justice between the 2? Now the scholars, the jurists have mentioned that insaf here means to do justice between the 2 in terms of nafqa and maintenance. So just say, for example, if you are giving £100 to one wife, you also have to give £100 to the other wife. It also means that doing adl and justice between 2 wives in terms of gifts and hadiyas. So just say, for example, if you bought some clothes for one wife, it is also wajib and obligatory that you buy the exact same clothes or something similar for the second wife. If, say, for example, you bought some jewelries for one wife, you also have to buy some jewelries for the other. So insaf in terms of gifts, insaf in terms of, as I was explaining, maintenance and nafqa, and also insaf in terms of bari mukarrar. I.e., in terms of if somebody is staying one night with one wife, then it is wajib that he stays one night with the second wife. Now obviously, just say for example, if somebody's got 2 wives, one is say living in Manchester, the one is in London, and it's difficult for him to commute every single day, then in that situation, if he was to now stay with say one wife for 5 days, then it is now wajib and obligatory that he stays for 5 days with the second wife. It will be impermissible for him to stay for one wife for 5 days and the other wife for 3 days. And the first wife say 5 days, the other wife does 2 days, 3 days. He will have to do exact same. So if he's staying with one wife for 5 days, he will have to stay with the second wife for 5 days, and so on and so forth. So what we mean by adl and insaf, it means in terms of nafqa, in terms of gifts, and also in terms of spending time with them. However, insaf or adl is not necessary when it comes to love. Because love is something which is got to do with the heart. And sometimes it's difficult for you to control your heart for whichever wife you love. So just say, for example, if you like one wife more than the other, then that's okay. You will not be questioned by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the hereafter. And as mentioned in the hadith, that out of all the wives, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam loved Hazrat Aisha anha the most. So just because Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam loved Hazrat Aisha anha, it didn't mean that he would do zulm or oppress the other wives. No, he would be fair with all of them. But because love is something to do with the heart, and it's sometimes difficult for you to control the heart with which wife you love and so on. So if you were to like one wife more than the other, or if you were to love one wife more than the other, then that is permissible. But what the Sharia is saying, that in terms of apparent things, like in terms of gifts and spending time and so on, there should be insaf and adl there. Also, insaf and adl is not necessary when it comes to intercourse and when it comes to jima. So just say, for example, like you spent one night with one wife and you had intercourse with her, it's not necessary that the second day when you are spending with the other wife, you need to have intercourse with her as well. Obviously, it is wajib that it's barabar when it comes to spending the night. But whether you want to have intercourse during that night or not, then that is not necessary and that is not wajib. So when it comes to, like as I said, love, when it comes to intercourse, adl and insaf is not necessary. Obviously desirable, like if you can maintain it, then it is good. But when it comes to apparent things, then adl and insaf is necessary. Otherwise, as mentioned, the hadith will be questioned by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the hereafter. Another point to remember is that this adl and insaf is necessary only in terms of spending the night. If, say, for example, if you were visiting another wife during the day, then that is considered to be permissible and allowed. So just say, for example, you decided that, okay, tonight you'll be spending with the second wife, but during the day, if you were to go and visit the first wife, then that would be allowed. So what I'm trying to say is that during the day, you could visit whichever wife you want. And there's many examples of that during Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam time, like through the day, he would visit various wives' house. But obviously, throughout during the night, that's where the adl and the insaf lies. And another point to remind everyone here is that the nights, it's the right of the wife. So you don't like spending the night with each wife, it's her right. It's not the right of the husband. So it's actually the right of the wife. And what I'm trying to imply from here is that if, say, for example, the wife wants to give up this right, then she would be allowed to do that. The husband can't give it up. The husband can't say, okay, I'm going to spend all my time with the first wife and not with you. That will be wrong. That will be zulm. That will be oppression. However, if the wife, out of their own will, she wants to give up the right, she goes, okay, you could spend with the first wife, you don't have to spend with me, or you could spend with the second wife and not with me, then that is allowed. So as long as the wife places the condition, or as long as the wife puts that through, then that would be allowed and that would be permissible. And there's examples of that in the hadith, in particular with regards to Hazrat Sauda radhiyallahu anha. As all of you know, that when she became a bit old, she then gifted her right to Hazrat Aisha radhiyallahu anha. So Hazrat Aisha then had 2 days out of all the wives, and the other wives had just one day. And obviously Hazrat Sauda radhiyallahu anha did not have any days. Why? Because she gifted that day to Hazrat Aisha radhiyallahu anha. So what I'm trying to say is that it's the exclusive right of the wife that she gives that particular time off. But obviously, if the husband, in that case, he doesn't have any right in terms of snatching that particular night from her. And also another point to remind everyone here is that when it comes to safar, when it comes to journey, then again it's entirely up to the husband who he wants, whichever wife he wants to take for the journey or for the safar. So what I mean by that is, just say for example, if the husband's got this pattern where 1 week he's staying with one wife and then the second week he's staying with the second wife. Now just say on the second week he's got a business trip to, say, Dubai or to Bangladesh or Pakistan. So it doesn't necessarily mean that he has to now take the second wife for the safar or for the journey. Whichever wife he wants to take, then he can take her. And there's many, again, examples of that in Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's life, that whenever Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam go for a journey, in particular for the various battles, he would take different wives. It's mentioned that when the Battle of Muraisi happened, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam took Hazrat Aisha radhiyallahu anha. And when the conquest of Makkah happened, then Salama radhiyallahu anha went, and Hazrat Maymuna radhiyallahu anha went as well. So for various battles, for various conquests, different wives of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam went. For the farewell Hajj, again different wives went. So what we can gather is that for journeys, it's not necessary that you have to take every single wife. It's up to the husband to decide whichever wife he wants to take. And it's mentioned here in Quduuri that it is preferable, desirable, that the husband, he draws lots. He does qur'a, like he doesn't actually specifically choose one wife, say, okay, I want to take you, I want to take Aisha, I want to take Zainab. But instead he draws lots, and then whichever wife comes out, then obviously he takes that particular wife and he accompanies her, or she accompanies him for the journey and for the safar. Now before I conclude this, just one particular point to mention here. This is obviously a point mentioned by Maulana Shaykh Ali Than rahimullah. Even though Hazrat had 2 wives himself, but in his fatawas he's mentioned that it is preferable that a husband or a person does not have 2 wives. Now the reason why Hazrat said this is because when you look at it, many of us who are married, we don't actually are fulfilling the rights of one wife. So now if we're going to get married again the second time, what's going to happen is that because with difficulty and mushaqqat, we're just about managing to fulfill the rights of one wife, then having another wife trying to fulfill her rights as well is something which is very, very difficult. So what Hazrat was saying, that it is more precautious and more ahwad that you just get married once, because remember, if you do get married the second time, or you have 3 wives or even 4 wives, the more wives you have, the more rights you have. And remember, if anyone fails in fulfilling the rights of the wives, then, as I mentioned in the hadith, that you'll be questioned by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the hereafter. What I'm trying to say, in other words, is that marriage, it's a sunnah. It's good that we do get married, but when we have one wife and we obviously fulfilling our needs with her and we fulfilling our rights with her, then the rest of the time we should actually be more towards our deen, more in terms of practicing our religion, doing more ibadat and doing more worship. Because what could happen is that if we have 2 wives, our whole day would go just about fulfilling the rights of wife number 1 and fulfilling the rights of wife number 2. And then we don't pray our namazis properly, we don't pray our namazis with jamaat, we're not doing our sunnahs properly, we're not doing our adabs and etiquettes properly. We'll be thinking more about fulfilling the rights of our wives compared to doing direct worship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because fair enough, marriage is a worship, is an ibadat, as I explained before, but it's an indirect worship. Similarly, doing like talks and lectures, bayans, these are all indirect worship. But the main worship is the direct worship between oneself and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That is the more reward. That is the more connection there. So instead of the husband thinking about fulfilling the rights of the wives, 2 wives, 3 wives, and spending the entire day with them, even though he's kind of engaging himself in indirect worship, but it's far more better and far more rewarding that a person or individual, he does direct worship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that, in a nutshell, is the tafsir and is the explanation of wa ila rabbika farghab, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that throughout the day, because Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is so busy giving da'wah and preaching, so all this da'wah and preaching is all indirect worship. But then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says wa ila rabbika farghab, that at night time, when everyone's gone to sleep, then Allah is ordering Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam to stand for tahajjud, for qiyamul layl, and pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why? Because that is the direct worship which everyone needs. Whether you're an alim, whether you're a preacher, whether you're a da'i, everyone, we need to have that direct worship to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If we just keep on doing the talks and the lectures and the bayans, we're always just doing the indirect worship. So it's far more beneficial, far more rewardable that we balance things out and we concentrate more on the direct worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we worship Allah and we do His ibadat properly, and that is where we gain the nearness and the closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now moving along, a few weeks ago, I mentioned that in Islam, it is the nikah or the marriage would be allowed, although makruh tahrimi, for a man to get married to a practicing Jewish girl or a practicing Christian woman. Now the next set of rulings which the author has mentioned here is, just say for example you have a scenario where the couple, the husband and wife, they're both non-Muslims, and if one of them converts to Islam, then what would happen to that particular marriage and what would happen to that particular nikah? Now it's mentioned here that, just say for example the couple, they're both non-Muslims, just say for example they're both either Christians or Jews, and the girl or the woman, she converts to Islam. So you have a scenario where the wife is a Muslimah and the husband is still a non-believer and he is still a kafir. Now the ruling goes on to say that in that situation, the qadi, so if it was an Islamic state, the qadi, he will present Islam to the husband. And obviously in a non-Islamic state, then obviously the imam, if the woman converts through an imam, then it will be the imam's responsibility to approach the husband and say to the husband to believe in Islam. Now it's mentioned here that if the husband accepts Islam, then fabiha, i.e. the nikah will remain intact. There's no need for them to do tajdeed the nikah and renew the nikah. However, it goes on to say that if the husband refuses, if the husband doesn't want to convert to Islam, then what would happen is that there will now be a separation between the husband and wife. Okay, so basically the imam or the qazi or whoever, they will try to convince the husband to convert to Islam. If the husband converts, then so be it, the nikah will remain intact. However, if the husband doesn't convert and he wants to remain on kufr and disbelief, then in that situation, the nikah will break. Regarding the other scenario could be like, again, husband and wife, the couple, they're both non-Muslims. But this time, just say the deen or the religion they're following is, say, of like something which is against Islam in terms of, just say both of them are Hindus, both of them are Sikhs, they're worshipping idols and so on, or just say both of them are atheists, they don't believe in the concept of God or the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now in that situation, if the husband was to convert to Islam, now the same rule will also apply as well in terms of the imam or the qadi would ask the woman, would ask the wife to convert to Islam as well. Now if she converts, then again fabiha, the nikah will remain intact. However, if she doesn't convert, then the nikah and the marriage will come to an end and it will break. Now the slight difference here, which I'd mentioned, is because if the wife, say for example, if she was a practicing Christian or a practicing Jew, and the husband was also a Jew or a Christian and he converts to Islam, then that nikah will still remain intact. Because as I already explained before, that marriage with a Jew or a Christian, the nikah would be done but makruh tahrimi. So if the wife happens to be a Christian or if she happens to be a practicing Jew, then the nikah is still intact. However, if she's, say for example, an atheist who does not believe in God, or she's a Sikh or a Hindu or anyone who just basically worships or ascribes partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then in that situation, if the husband was to convert, then the scenario, the procedure which I just explained to you now, in terms of the imam or the qadi will try to convince the wife to convert to Islam. If she does, then the nikah will remain intact. Otherwise, the nikah and the marriage will come to an end. Now this then takes me on to another type of nikah or marriage, which again people may have some question marks whether it is allowed or not. And the masla here, or the ruling or the question we need to look at here, is with regards to a pregnant woman. That if a woman is pregnant, then can somebody marry her or not? Now the woman falling pregnant could be of two scenarios. Either the woman, she fell pregnant with a man, and the guy she wants to marry is the father of the child. So just an example, outside nikah, out of wedlock, they did zina, they committed adultery, fornication. The girl, she falls pregnant, and now to like basically cover up her sin, you could say in a way, they try to do the nikah and try to do the marriage. Now the question is that is such a nikah allowed or not? So the masla or the ruling is that it is allowed. So just say for example, if a girl, she fell pregnant and now she wants to marry the guy who is basically the father of the child, then she can marry, and after the marriage it is also permissible for them to continue having intercourse, because obviously because the child, the woman who's pregnant, because the father is, because the guy happens to be the father of the child, then that guy can also continue having intercourse with her, obviously until she gives birth to the child. So that is the first part of the ruling. The second part of the ruling is where a girl is pregnant and she wants to marry someone who's not the father of the child. So just say for example, she committed zina with somebody, she's fallen pregnant, and again you probably hear these stories as well, that parents find out that the girl or the daughter's fallen pregnant with a man. So what they do, they take her to Bangladesh, they take her to Pakistan and get her married. So just say the scenario here where the girl's fallen pregnant and she's gone back to Pakistan and she's marrying a boy who's obviously, or the guy who's not the father of the child. Now the question is that is the nikah allowed or not? So the answer is that yes, the nikah would be allowed, but that person, i.e. the husband who she married, would not be allowed to have intercourse with her until she gives birth to the child. And the reason why that is not allowed is because it mentioned a hadith of Sunan al-Tirmizi, where Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, the nearest meaning to the hadith is that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that no man should plant his semen in somebody else's plantation. In other words, when the woman has fallen pregnant with somebody else's semen, i.e. somebody else's child, then no one else should then water that particular plantation with his semen, i.e. in other words, not to have intercourse with that particular girl or woman until she gives birth to the child. So what we can derive from the ruling here is that if a woman is pregnant, then you can marry her. Okay, whether if it's the father of the child, then obviously Batarika Ola, he's allowed to marry her. Obviously he can have intercourse with her, and obviously if the guy doesn't happen to be the father of the child, then he can get married to her, but obviously having any kind of intercourse and jima and so on and so forth, all these things would not be allowed and would not be permissible. The next question regarding this, or next masla regarding this issue here, is regarding the lineage of the child. Like again, the woman, she's fallen pregnant, and now she's just got married to someone. Now the question is that this child, who will be the father of this child? Now the answer here depends on, from the day they got married, if within 6 months the woman gives birth to the child, then that child will not be attributed to the husband or to the guy she married. Basically the child will be now waladu zina, born out of wedlock. However, if the girl or the woman, she gives birth to the child after 6 months from the day they got married, then that child will now be attributed to the father or to the guy who she married, even though everybody knows that this guy who she married is not the actual father of the child. Okay, and I'll just explain that again. I'll just go over this again. So basically the reason why is because in Islam, or in particular in the Hanafi fiqh, minimum limit or period of pregnancy is 6 months, and 2 years is the maximum. So 6 months is minimum, 2 years is maximum. So just say for example, a woman, she's pregnant, and now she marries the guy, just say the guy who she's marrying happens to be the father of the child. Now from the day they got married, within 6 months, she gives birth to the child. Islamically speaking, that father or that guy who she married would not be considered the father. Even though DNA and so on may prove that this guy is the father, but because she gave birth to the child less than 6 months from the nikah, so that child will not be attributed to the father anymore. And obviously if it's after 6 months, then it will be the father's. Then the second scenario, where the girl, obviously she's fallen pregnant, and she gets married to a guy who everybody knows that this guy is not the father of the child. Now again, the same scenario applies. Within 6 months she gives birth. Obviously it's not going to be attributed to that guy who she married. However, if she was to give birth to the child after 6 months, then the guy who she married, remember everybody knows that this guy is not the father of the child, but Islamically speaking, this guy who she married would now be the father of that child. Because of the hadith, al-waladu lil-firash, which means that, the husband, the firash, the husband, the child will be attributed to the husband. So exactly in this scenario here as well, that if the woman was to give birth to the child after 6 months, then that child will be now attributed to this particular person, i.e. husband who she married, even though as a DNA and so on can prove that he is not biologically the father. But because in Islam, it's very, very important, and I did touch on this last week as well, about lineage and maintaining the nasab and the lineage. So exactly here as well, that we don't want a child growing up not having a father, or not being considered to be born out of wedlock, because he's then humiliated, he's then looked down upon in society. So therefore in that situation, the Sharia and Islam tries its best to have a lineage and a nasab of this child. And even though in this scenario people may know that this guy is not the father of the child, but obviously if he was born after 6 months, then we will still attribute this particular child to the father here. The next ruling here, which we need to touch on very quickly, is regarding children and who would they be attributed to, in terms of when it comes to parents who may be following two different religions. Now the principle is, generally speaking, is that the child is always tabi or subservient to his father. So that's with everything, in terms of lineage, in terms of even to establish whether the child is a Sayyid or not. We look at it from the father's point of view. Why? Because lineage always is connected from the father's side. However, when it comes to deen, when it comes to religion, we then look at khairul abawayn, i.e. out of the parents, which one of the parents are following on the straight path, on the straight deen. So just say, for example, they're given some examples here, that just say there's parents, one of them happens to be Ahle Kitab. So just say if the mother happens to be a Ahle Kitab or Jew or a Christian, and the husband she has, he's an atheist, or he, say for example, doesn't believe in a religion, or he's, say, a mushrik, or someone who attributes partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now in that situation, the ruling is that this particular child will now be attributed to the mother. Why? Because the mother is following a religion or a deen which is more better than what the father is following. Because obviously, even though both of them compared to Islam are false, but if you want to compare, say, Ahle Kitab or Shirk, and obviously Ahle Kitab is more better than ascribing partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So therefore in that particular instance, that child will be attributed to the mother. Similarly, just say for example, if you have a scenario where like the mother, she's a Muslimah, she just like converted to Islam, she's concealing her Islam, say, from the husband, and just say the husband, he's still a non-Muslim, a non-believer. So any children the couple have, which is obviously they are below the age of puberty, then they would be attributed to the mother. Okay, so generally speaking, we tend to attribute the child to the father. But in this scenario here, because the mother is following the religion of Islam, the final religion of Islam, the final Sharia of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so therefore in that situation, the child will be attributed to the mother. Now you may be thinking to yourself, what's the big issue about attributing the child to the mother? The issue is that, just say for example, if the child was to pass away. If the child was to pass away, then because the mother was a Muslimah, so what would happen is that this child will be treated like a Muslim as well. Hence, he or she would be given a janazah, a kafan, ghusl, shrouding, everything. So just say for example, it could happen, just say for example, as I was saying, the husband, he was a non-believer, the wife was a Muslimah, and she's got a young child. Now just say for example, something happened, an accident, and the mother and the young child, they both pass away. So in that situation, because the mother was a Muslimah and the child now being subservient to the best religion, i.e. Islam, this child will also be considered as a Muslim as well. So therefore it will now be farz kifaya, a communal obligation of all the Muslims living in that area to now give janazah, kafan, shrouding, ghusl to both the woman, the mother who passed away on Islam, and also to the child as well. So that is the ruling when it comes to children when they are when their parents are of different religions and different deens, that the child will always be subservient to the khayrul abawain. Obviously, generally speaking, the child tends to be following the father, but in this particular situation, it will be the following the mother. And one final ruling here is regarding irtidad and apostasy. Apostasy or irtidad is one of those things which breaks the nikah straight away. So it's very, very dangerous. So just say, for example, husband and wife, they're both Muslims. So if the husband was to say kalima kufr, obviously we try to interpret his actions or what he said in a good way. So just say if the husband did say something which bordered kind of kufr and shirk, we try to give him the benefit of the doubt and try to think, okay, probably didn't mean it, or this is what he meant. But obviously there are occasions where basically the husband will say something which is 100% kufr. You can't do any kind of interpretation. Or the wife may say something or ridiculing the Sharia, ridiculing the Quran, mocking, like namaz and these kind of things. So in that situation, these kind of comments takes a person out of the fold of Islam. So it's mentioned here that obviously if the husband or wife, if they were to do irtidad, if they committed apostasy, then the nikah breaks. The nikah will come to an end. And what they will have to do is that they will then have to redo the nikah and redo the marriage again. It's like a talaq-e-bain, like an irrevocable divorce, which basically means that the nikah breaks straight away. So if they want to get back together again, they will have to redo the marriage. They can't just get back together and just pretend or do tawbah and pretend nothing has happened. They will have to redo the marriage and the nikah again. Because if they don't, then obviously the time that they're living together would be considered as an adulterous relationship. Inshallah, we'll leave it there. May Allah give us the tawfiq to act on what we said.